Good evening and welcome to tonight's Artist and Artist Lecture with Ken Lum at DIA Chelsea. This program started 12 years ago and it consists of a two-part provocation. First, we invite an artist we admire to consider sharing publicly his or her thoughts, opinions, critique, or praises on the work of one of the artists in our collection, or 10 sites, or even recent temporary exhibition or performance program. And secondly, it helps us expand our prior understanding of his or her process, interest, and conception of art. We are grateful to all of you for coming tonight and for supporting the series with such enthusiasm. This program is supported in part with funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and we are also thankful to Brooklyn Brewery, of course, who have been longtime supporters of this program and other public programs for their complimentary beverages tonight. We are also personally thankful to our colleagues at DIA for their assistance in synchronizing all aspects of this program. And I would also like to extend with great gratitude to tonight's speaker, Ken Lum, for his kind acceptance to be part of this series, and who will be speaking on Ian Wilson, whom DIA has been hosting a discussion series with since 2011. Ken Lum was born in 1956 in Vancouver, Canada. He began his college studies at Simon Fraser University, and while there, he enrolled in an art class with Jeff Wall, an experience which affirmed his interest in becoming an artist. In 1985, he completed his master's degree at the University of British Columbia. Since then, and as noted in his biography that accompanies the announcement of his recent appointment as director of the undergraduate fine arts program at the University of Pennsylvania School of Design, Lum is a, quote, conceptual artist known for his work in photography and sculpture that addresses private and public concerns, constructions of identity, space, and politics. In the 1970s, Lum was often referred to as part of the Vancouver School, along with Wall, Ian Wallace, Stan Douglas, and Rodney Graham, for his conceptual photography, a medium he has continued to work in throughout his career. For instance, in his Photo Mirror series, which was begun in 1997, Lum hangs ordinary domestic mirrors, and within the frame, he inserts personal snapshots of random people. As a viewer, you are destabilized in being confronted with both yourself and the everyday world of strangers. In the 1980s, Lum began working in sculpture. One prominent work of this time period from a series titled Furniture Sculptures is Red Circle, 1986, which is a couch that is positioned inward as an enclosed and confined circle. Presented as a seemingly ordinary red couch, it is an inherently inaccessible space due to its subverted orientation. Lum is also well known for his interest in language, such as in his series Shopkeeper Signs. Further defining Lum's concern with the dialectics of public space, these sculptures read as shop signs, commonly found in strip malls, yet their statements reflect on world and personal politics, such as one that states, Taj Kebab Palace, free pakoras before 7. Peace in Kashmir and conflict in India and Pakistan. In his 3-decade career, Lum's work has been included in important group exhibitions, such as the Moscow Biennial of Contemporary Art in 2012, the Istanbul Biennial in 2008, Documenta 11 in 2002, and the Sao Paulo Biennial in 1998. In 2004, the Power Plant Contemporary Art Center in Toronto held a retrospective of his photo-based works, and more recently, a major survey of his work was organized by the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2011. This past spring, Lum's public sculpture, The Space Between Scott and Plessy, for which the artist sculpted the heads of Dred Scott and Homer Plessy, both American citizens of African descent who challenged segregation laws in St. Louis and New Orleans, was installed in Lohmeyer Sculpture Park in St. Louis as part of the River Between Us project. In addition to his art making, Lum is taught at the University of British Columbia, where he was professor and head of the graduate program in studio art from 2000 to 2006, and he is also taught at the Milton Avery Graduate School at Bard College, and he is currently a professor in the School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania, where, as I mentioned earlier, is also the director of the program. Lum has also co-curated the Sharjah Biennial 7 in 2005 and the Shanghai Modern, 1919 to 1994, 1954 rather, in 2004. And he also was co-founder and founding editor of the renowned Yushu Journal of Contemporary Chinese Art. Please join me in welcoming Ken Lum.
Thank you, Kelly. That was too generous. How do I knew I was going to be in trouble. Okay, there. That's the title of my talk. Ian Wilson, from Chalk Circle to Full Circle. When the Dia Art Foundation invited me to speak about one of the artists in their collection, I chose Ian Wilson for the most personal of reasons. I would like to take you back to 1983. I was running a little storefront gallery in the industrial sector of Vancouver, Canada, at the time. One of the first exhibitions that I did was to co-organize an exhibition with the artist Ian Wallace that included Wilson's Chalk Circle on the Floor of 1968, along with the works by Daniel Buren, Dan Graham, Onkawara, and Lawrence Weiner. I remember feeling a sense of exhilaration over an exhibition of such celebrated artists in what was basically my living room at the time. The works for Wilson, Buren, and Weiner were realized by following instruction cards. The instructions for Chalk Circle on the Floor were as follows. Attach a white china chalk pencil to one end of a 3-foot-long thin wire. The actual chalk center of the pencil would be 3/8 of an inch before sharpening. At the other end of the wire, attach a nail. After hammering the nail into the floor, draw the circle around the nail, keeping the wire taut. Using the enclosed photo of the density of the white chalk, gradually build up the line until it is 1/2 inch thick. When the circle is drawn, remove the nail from the floor. From time to time, using the above described method, redraw any portions of the circle that have been smudged, keeping the circle as clean and as well defined as possible. Chalk Circle on the Floor inspired me to think about the relationship between art and democracy. The work existed as an infinite edition. This meant that it could be acquired by any number of individuals or institutions. The work also challenged, without disaffirming, a view of art that I had always held regarding the integral place of drawing in the production of art. I had always loved to draw, but coming as I did from a poor and fractious Cantonese family, a career in art was never an option, even if there were many times that I felt art, at least in terms of drawing, was my calling. My mother spoke not a word of English, and the world beyond Vancouver's Chinatown was, at least in my earliest years, like the proverbial edge of a flat world where ships risked falling off into the abyss. What was drilled into me as a boy was that I should pursue a profession that guaranteed a good and steady salary. So in university, I studied an area of chemistry and soon found myself working in a laboratory dedicated to pesticide research. I spent a lot of time in a white lab coat with pocket calculator attached to my belt and Dimilin baseball cap on my head. Dimilin being the trade name for difluorobenzeron, a benzoluria-type insecticide of the benzamide class, a derivative of benzoic acid, which is used in forest management to control insect pests by inhibiting the production of chitin, which is the main component used by arthropods, including insects, to build its exoskeleton. It is also, by the way, one of the metabolites of difluorobenzeron, 4-chloronilan, which has been classified by the United States Environmental Protection Agency as a probable human carcinogen. One day in the laboratory where I worked, I had a day of reckoning. My superior, Dr. Bob Costello, put his arm around my shoulder and said, "Ken, you keep working the way you are, and one day this lab will be yours." I scanned the room about me, and all I could see were other white-coated co-workers, many also wearing Dimilin caps. Within a week, I quit science and entered into art at the very tail end of conceptualism. Wilson's work is difficult to research because there is so little in the way of proper labeling and documentation. Art relies heavily on its ability to be documented. Art generally has a form, even if it is an aesthetic presence mentally conceived. But Wilson's work, as Edward Allington has written, seems to be directed at establishing something even less tangible than this. What does it mean to make art over a long career that is so resistant to the artistic and even historical archive? Wilson stopped making object-based art in 1968 and devoted himself entirely to conversation as an art form. 2 years later, he gave a telling statement about why he chose language as his art. I present oral communication as an object. All art is information and communication. I've chosen to speak rather than sculpt. I've freed art from a specific place. It's now possible for everyone. I'm diametrically opposed to the precious object. My art is visual, not visualized. But no, my art is not visual, but visualized. I wrote to Wilson to ask him whether he missed making object-based art and the time spent in the studio. I asked him this because it seemed to me there was a gentle and quietly elegiac quality to his early object-based art that shone through even in the sparse amount of visual documentation I was able to secure from Dia on his work. His reply was, "No, I don't miss making objects at all. I like the space I live in to be empty, but there are plenty of decisions involved in arranging discussions that have a structure that encourages participation, the subject of the discussions, the number of people, etc. There are so many different types of discussions that require different approaches. The art system is the same as it was when I started. We were more critical of the establishment then. I like the space I live in to be empty." This line struck me. I live in a rather quiet life with my wife and son. We do not have a television. We are not on social media, nor do we subscribe to Netflix. We play with our little boy a lot. We read to him before he goes to bed at night, and when there is time, I spend it working on my art. We do not believe in accumulating things, and we have made it a habit to relinquish items to our neighborhood thrift store on a regular basis. But the space we live in is not empty. It is full. This Untitled Disk work, the image here, from 1966, was one of a series of untitled discs that Wilson made using wood and plaster. It represents a final stage before his abandonment of materially constructed objects. Untitled Disk is a circular object, lightly convex, that once installed on the wall takes on many associations. A navel on which the viewer casts his or her gaze, or an outgrowth of the wall itself. There is tension between what is inward and what is outward, what is whole and what is empty. At the time of Untitled Disk, Wilson was known primarily as a monochrome painter, interested in the metaphorical content of non-objective painting, to which adjoining aesthetic value to language was also a concern. In 1966, he exhibited Red Square. It is a monochrome painting measuring approximately 20 inches square and realized on a thin sheet of fiberglass with inward curving edges that minimize the effect of shadows on the wall. The reduction of chromatic elements was important to Wilson's ultimate move to abandon all object form. But much more intriguing is the explicit reference to Kazimir Malevich's celebrated work from 1913 of the same title. To pay homage to Malevich causes me to speculate on Wilson's political idealism for art and society, which may be a current that persists through the discussions that he has been conducting since 1972. Red Square also exposes a repressed linkage between two avant-garde periods, that between 1920s Russia and 1960s America. The linkage calls up the inhibited role that politics plays in avant-garde American art of the 1960s and since. Wilson's allusion to Malevich also calls to mind an important work of the minimalist artist Dan Flavin. In 1964, Flavin began a series titled Monuments to V. Tatlin, an homage in fluorescent tubes to post-revolutionary Russian artist Vladimir Tatlin's Monument to the Third International of 1920. Evoking constructivism through Tatlin and suprematism through Malevich raises two important points. Both movements rejected the idea of autonomous art in favor of the idea that art could serve as an instrument for social purpose. Wilson identified with Malevich's goal of advancing art to its zero-degree point, the division between art and non-art. According to suprematist artist Al Lissitzky, what is created at this point of division is the ultimate illusion of irrational space with its infinite extensibility into the background and foreground. At this point, it is interesting to think about the way in which one experiences Untitled Disk, for example, as an object that extends into the background and foreground of the exhibition space. For Malevich, when art reaches the precipice of non-art, it is the, quote, supremacy of pure feeling or perception, unquote, that is achieved and consciously experienced. The language of suprematism pervades the title of a number of Wilson's discussion topics, such as the pure awareness of the absolute, which was held here at the Dia Art Foundation last month and to which I participated. More complex to answer in the work of Wilson is the instrumental half of supremacism, that of art as a tool for social change. Arriving in New York as a young man from South Africa in the early 1960s, Wilson's artistic career has to be considered in light of the time he spent growing up in a country led by a monstrous apartheid regime. His earliest memories, his earliest friendships were formed in a place where questions of political freedom and human dignity continue to haunt today. Wilson's artistic career has to be considered in light of the emergence also of modern interpersonal communications theory, which, by the way, enabled anti-apartheid movements to publicize to the world what was taking place then in South Africa. According to communications historians Robert L. Heath and Jennings Bryant, the 1960s saw scholars adopting communications as the central term because they wanted to study it as a significant and unique aspect of human behavior. Claude Shannon, often referred to as the father of communications theory, was a mathematician, electronic engineer, and cryptologist who wrote several key papers following the Second World War that astutely theorized the transition of telecommunications from analog to digital transmission systems. According to Cornell art historian Maria Fernandez, Claude Shannon understood communication exclusively as the replication in the receiver of the data pattern entered by the sender. From this perspective, the semantic content, as well as the receiver's interpretation of the message, were irrelevant to communication. That is, in communication theory, what is paramount in importance are the pathways of communications. Now allow me to read you a part of a 2002 interview between Ian Wilson and Dutch novelist Oscar van den Boogaard, in which Wilson is asked whether he could speak about some of the content of a particular discussion. In the interview, he iterates a view identical to Shannon. Boogaard: I've forgotten what I asked you in Basel. Do you remember it? Wilson: yes, literally even, but I don't want to talk about that. That would mean that we end up in the discussion, and I only want to talk about the discussion, about the technique, and not about the content. We need to make a distinction between the ideas of this interview and the ideas that take shape in a discussion, because it is my experience that when the ideas are published, it is always a disappointment. But when the ideas are formulated in the discussion, they are good. The actual content of the discussions has to remain in the context of the discussions themselves. And I want to show you a video featuring Claude Shannon demonstrating his concept of pure communications comprised of input and feedback through a juggling machine that he invented.
Constructing these juggling clowns led another mathematician, Dr. Claude Shannon, to become more intrigued with the problem of building a real juggling machine.
Machines like this only give the illusion of juggling. They have a complex mechanism, but the props of the control never actually leave the ground. They're all held up by wires and so on. And so far as I know, no one has ever built a real juggling machine, and it occurred to me that I would like to try to do that.
The The juggler's skills cannot yet be engineered. To build a device that could imitate him, Dr. Shannon had to simplify the problem.
When you bounce juggle, the ball is almost stationary, so you're not wasting much energy. All you have to do is give it a little toss like that, and we'll come back to the same height. So you're saving a lot of energy. One can see how easy it is. Another aspect of this is that the new ball is moving slowly when you catch it.
W.C. Fields, Dr. Shannon's juggling machine, lacks feedback. It can't sense variations in its toss or catch, and so must rely only on the repetitive dynamics of the ball's fall and bounce in order to maintain its rhythmical cascade. Cut-like hands help make up for the lack of feedback, catching and funneling the balls back onto the optimum path. The mathematical analysis of juggling.
Shannon's concept of pure communication was of great interest to many artists working in the 1960s and 1970s, including Wilson, as indicated by his assertion that all art is information and communication. Now compare this Shannon video with the following video work by Bruce Nauman from 1967 and 68. Of course, I was bouncing two balls between the floor and ceiling with changing rhythm. With this work by Nauman, it is the studio environment that is the communicative channel, in the sense that the nature of creation requires no object or even objective, but simply creative engagement, as simple as passing time in the studio. An ascending view among artists of the 1960s and early 1970s, such as Robert Barry, James Lee Byers, Joseph Kossuth, Lydia Clark, Douglas Hubler, Valley Export, and many others, was that the object form of art reduced the effectiveness of art due to the mediation of art by the object form. Even more problematic is the mediation of art by the object form's secondary status as commodity. For artists like Clark and Export, the silencing of women in a patriarchal society meant the prohibition of the woman's body to communicate. Their work was often premised on speech through the active participation of the viewer, as well as employing performance as an act of recovery of their bodies from male mediation. This is from 1970s by Valley Export called Body Tape. body tape from 1970 is a striking work by Export. With the accompaniment of intertitles, the artist explores the discourse of her body as a synecdoche for all women's bodies via a series of sign action transmissions. James Lee Byers turned not only to his body through performance, but the new communications medium of community access television. On November 28, 1968, he broadcast on live television the World Question Center as an expression of the empowerment of the questioner rather than those who provide answers. He asserted by way of a question, I can answer the question, but am I bright enough to ask it? It is the interrogative that is important. Lee Byers' question implies a second important question, one regarding not who gets to speak, but who is not being listened to.
Fine question.
Do you understand it?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yes. Yes. Dr. Kronhauser?
Yes? Good evening.
Good evening. As you know, I'm the self-appointed World Questions Center, and we're looking for questions, hopefully, that are the synthesis of the person that we're calling, and looking for questions that are really pertinent to them in regards to their own feelings of an evolving sense of knowledge.
Yes.
I wonder if you might offer us a question like that by phone.
Well, instead of offering you a question, I can tell you that you're calling us, my wife and I, on a very special day. Because today we presented for the second time our film Freedom to Love, which we shot in Holland last June, to the German censorship board, and they were very liberal, very generous, fair-minded, and they passed the film, which has very strong erotic content with only very minor cuts.
Yes?
So this is a happy occasion. And,
Yes, well, I'm sorry to ask you, but can you pose a question out of such good fortune?
I can make. I would like to pose the following question.
Yes, please.
How long will it be before censorship is going to be abolished once and for all in the whole civilized world?
Thank you very much. That's a very fine question. That's certainly a lot to think about. That's certainly a lot to think about, isn't it?
Very much on our hearts and minds, believe me, because we don't believe that it has any censorship as any true democracy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you also.
Dr. Jung,
Yes,
can you hear me?
yes, not very well.
As you know, I'm James Lee Byers, and the
Yes, I
self-appointed.
know.
Yes. Would you offer us a question that you feel is pertinent in regards to your own evolution of knowledge by phone now?
Yes? I don't
Please.
know. I have no idea what you wanted to know.
Well, I would like to know a question, as I've just said, that you feel is very important to you in regards to your own personal evolvement with the
Yeah.
area that you think you know the most about.
Well, I would say that the most important question for me is how we could enhance imagination. I feel imagination is in chains now, and we don't
I
do
beg your-
enough to free it.
I beg your pardon, could you speak a little closer? I can't...
I see. For me, the most important question, and with regard to my own, not only to my own evolution, but also to the evolution of other people and of society, that I feel that imagination nowadays is in chains, and that I wonder what we could do to free it and to make it more systematic, how to get away the blocks from imagination in people and in society in general.
Fine, well, thank you.
Yeah.
James,
Yes?
Dr. Benson Cooley.
Dr. Cooley?
Yes.
We're looking for Dr. Cooley?
Yes.
Yes, I'm James Lee Byers, and we're looking for questions and calling people around the world, trying to find questions that are very important for their own evolution. I wonder if you might offer us a question like that on the phone.
Something important for man's evolution?
For you, in regards to the evolution of your own sense of knowledge, in your discipline. What question is very pertinent to you, for example, at this point? For yourself?
Well, I don't understand exactly. I want to get the question exactly straight before I try to answer.
Yes, for example, do you have a hypothesis at this point that you could put into a question of general intellectual quality that you could offer to us on the phone? In medicine, or in the area that you are most concerned with at this time?
Well, let's see what I could offer in this regard.
The idea of an authentic sublation of autonomous art integrated into the praxis of life was one of the key concerns of artists of the conceptual art era. Given such concerns, representation posed an especially egregious problem, since representation is, by definition, an act of mediation. For many artists, the turn to the body meant a turn to the site where creativity and consciousness issues. Such a turn in art had its parallel within a developing countercultural society, which included the exploration of the mind through drugs and the adoption of Eastern philosophies, such as Buddhism. And I say this as the son of a Buddhist mother. Wilson turned to the body too. The bodies that participate in his discussions are ones that think, listen, and speak. To dispense with material objects as the body gains self-understanding through the proximity with others in the search for an absolute awareness evokes for me the saying of the 11th century Chinese philosopher Shao Yung that forms can be split, but spirit cannot be split. In 1976, Wilson visited the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, the Netherlands, then directed by Rudy Fuchs. It was from that point on that Wilson organized discussions on a regular basis there until 1986. After 1986, discussions were more sporadically conducted, although they continue to the present. In the 1980s, Wilson experimented with the printed word and produced some series of books in which a single abstract word or short phrase, such as unknowable, absolute knowledge, or perfect, is repeated on every page. The repetition of the word or phrase takes on the effect of a mantra, which in Indian philosophies is a term for a verbal sound considered capable of creating spiritual transformation. Mantra, as some of you may know, also can mean circle. The sounds are meant to engage the mind of both the one who chants as well as the one who listens. The idea of democratic communications is evoked. Wilson has also produced a number of artist books simply titled Section, followed by a number. The word section reminds me of how nations organize their constitutions according to acts and sections. During the apartheid government, Section 10, for example, outlined how all black South Africans had to be granted permission to reside in prescribed urban areas. Residency had to be permitted. It was not a right. And this residency was for the purpose of providing labor in the industrial sectors of the society or in the shops of the city. Those who received permission were referred to as Section 10ers. This permission was never permanent, and it could be revoked at any time. Linguistically, a section also always implies a pre-existing whole. A section can only be derived from a whole. Chapters have a slightly different connotation in that they are like building blocks towards a whole. After all, a chapter can be incomplete, while a section is always complete to the extent that it is a section. As such, naming the artist's books by the word section followed by a number is homologically related to Buddhist or Hindu sutras, collections of canonical texts which were then assembled into a book of teachings. Here is an excerpt from Wilson's Section 36 from 1984 that play on the binary of knowns and unknowns. That which is unknown is not known. Not known, that which is unknown is not unknown. It is not known and not unknown. Not unknown, that which is unknown is not known and unknown. Not unknown, not known. That which is unknown is not known and unknown. That it is not known is not unknown, is unknown. That it is known. not known and not unknown, the unknown is known. That it is not known and not unknown is known. That it is not known and not unknown is what is known. It is that which is not known and not unknown, which is known of the unknown. Veering close to tautological language, that which is known and unknown is what is known, echoes the dilatational language of Eastern philosophy such as Hinduism and Buddhism, which sees conscious awareness leading to an understanding of an absolute that leads to action as the core of what it means to be human. In Buddhism, those who only know the perceptible or knowable things without knowing the imperceptible or unknowable are deemed unenlightened by Buddha. Thus, that which is known and unknown is what is known, are the words of a self-inquiring Ian Wilson on the path to enlightenment. Now compare Wilson's text from section 36 with the following text from Parabrahma Sutra, a Hindu text as explained by the Sri Datta Swami. When the unimaginable nature of God is experienced through imaginable medium, it means that you have attained the knowledge of unimaginable nature of God. This does not mean that the unimaginable nature of God becomes imaginable. Knowledge of unimaginable nature means that the existence of unimaginable nature is detected or known. Without the knowledge, there cannot be experience. The experience of unimaginable nature means only the knowledge of existence of unimaginable nature of God. And in this point, there is no possibility of the unimaginable nature becoming imaginable. Through the knowledge of existence of unimaginable nature of God, you have concluded the existence of unimaginable God in a specific medium. Here, either in the stage of detection or in the stage of result of detection, there is no possibility of knowing the unknowable nature of God. You can only know the existence of the unknowable God, and this does not mean that you can know the unknowable nature of God. The language is akin. Opening oneself up to what is known and unknown evokes also the famous aphorism of Taoist philosopher Shandao that one should abandon knowledge and discard self, which is a call for humans to live the actual life as it comes to you and not one prescribed by theory. Now let me play for you a YouTube clip of a quote.
There are reports that there is no evidence of a direct link between it.
By former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld.
There are known knowns. There are things we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
Excuse me, but is this an unknown unknown?
I'm not.
Several unknowns, and I'm just wondering if this is an unknown
I'm not going to
unknown.
say which it is.
But Mr. Secretary,
I'm right here. I'm right here.
That was Donald Rumsfeld at the Department of Defense news briefing in 2002 on the subject of missing evidence linking the government of Iraq with the supply of weapons of mass destruction to terrorist groups. Wilson's words are not analogous to Rumsfeld's words, but they are structurally homologous, like an evil twin. Wilson is interested in knowing the absolute through the opening up of the self to the infinitude that is life, while Rumsfeld was making the case for a frightening totality. When I participated in Wilson's most recent discussion here at DIA last month, titled The Pure Awareness of the Absolute, I arrived about 10 minutes early to find a group of people sitting in a circle that was approximate to the size of Wilson's chalk circle on the floor of 1968. This early work now takes on new meaning for me as a spatial marker for a participatory dialogue in the round. It is no longer possible for me to see it exclusively as a conceptualist reductivist gesture, for there is now always an accompanying image that I have of strangers seated together and opening up to one another through self-reflection. Prior to the start of this discussion, no one spoke to one another. The ambience was quite hallowed and awkward, with some browsing their smartphones while others simply sitting in anticipation of the arrival of the artist. When Wilson did arrive, I found myself sitting to his immediate right. The session began with a series of questions in the manner of a Socratic inquiry. The artist asked, "Could we agree that there is an absolute? Can we agree that the absolute can be experienced? Can we agree we can be aware of experiencing the absolute? And so on. Again, it is the asking of questions that is important. Wilson's use of the we is significant as well, in that it implicated each one of us in what was being discussed. As people shared their thoughts, I could not help but study Wilson's visage. He is a tall man with a cellophane skin from age. Lodged in his right ear was a hearing aid, which was always in view to me. The session was regularly punctuated by his request to whoever spoke to speak up, since he had such difficulty hearing what was being said. I was moved by his vulnerability and the earnestness of his pleas for people to allow him to hear what they had to say. He genuinely wanted to know answers to questions that he knows cannot be answered with any certainty. Toward the end of the discussion, Wilson surprised me when he recounted a recent trip he made to Berlin. He said that he had always wanted to visit the National Gallery of Mies van der Rohe in Berlin. He said that he was sure that he would encounter the absolute there, because he believed that extreme aesthetic beauty could bring one to an experiencing of the absolute. But he said that he was disappointed because upon encountering the National Gallery, he felt nothing. But then he said that he knows a brother and sister at play in the open plaza that envelops Mies's edifice. The brother was playing on the precarious ledge and soon admonished by his mother for doing so. This caused the young boy to cry. Seeing his tears, his sister embraced him to console him. At that moment, Wilson said, he sensed the absolute. This story expresses some of the conflict at play between the ideals of art and the realities of the world, a conflict which has driven Wilson as far away from art as possible while remaining within it. In some respects, the story of his art is the story of his withdrawal from art. But perhaps this is not accurate. After all, here we are gathered in one of the art world's great legitimating institutions, participating in a presentation on the art of Ian Wilson. The story of his art is the story of the limits of art, the story of having doubts about art while still wanting to believe in art. After the discussion ended, I thought about how little it took for people to open themselves up to one another. I thought about my beautiful wife and child and how much I loved them. I thought about my love for my family as a kind of absolute. I thought also of another circle in my life. When I began my art career, I would visit New York City as much as I could to take in the art world here. I often stayed with my grandmother, who lived on Hester Street with 5 others. There were 6 adults comprising my grandmother, my grandfather, my great-uncle, my uncle, and 2 aunts living together in a dilapidated 1-bedroom. My great-uncle and grandfather worked in a Chinese sausage factory, while the rest of the family, including my grandmother, worked in a sweatshop on the edge of Chinatown, not far from Soho. My grandmother was the boss of the household, and she always larded me with so much support as she could whenever I came to visit. Last year, I accepted a job at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Soon after arriving in Philadelphia, I made a trip to New York. I was staying in a hotel near 7th Avenue. I was looking for a place to eat when I felt that someone was watching. The feeling was so strong that I felt compelled to retrace my steps. Upon doing so, I was shocked to discover a backlit photograph of my grandmother in the foyer of the Unite Here labor union building. Let's see. To get back to here it is. Yeah. You just leave it like that. Unite Here is an acronym for 2 amalgamated unions. Unite standing for the Union of Needle Trades, Industrial and Textile Employees, and Here standing for the Hotel Employees and Restaurant Employees International Union. Unite took over the formerly known International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which my grandmother was a part. My grandmother led a hard life, moving from China to New York in the early 1960s, about the same time as Ian Wilson. And she passed away in 2005 at the age of 91. It is difficult to know when precisely the photograph of her was taken, but it looks as though she is in her late 60s and early 70s. She is depicted seated behind a sewing machine and wearing a favorite herringbone vest that she made and wore often. The portrait of her belies the hellish reality of what it was like to work in the sweatshop that she did. I remember going there as a boy and finding it almost impossible to breathe without a mask due to all the lint in the air. The air was intensely hot and humid, and the powerful electric fans providing relief did so at the cost of a loud and constant din. I remember seeing young mothers sewing with babies strapped to their backs, while toddlers stood about idly, waiting for their mothers to finish their shifts. I had my first solo exhibition in New York in the mid-'80s at Gallery Nature Mort, at around the same time, I'm guessing, that my grandmother was photographed for the image that now hangs at Unite here. She surprised me at the opening by attending. I was chatting with some attendees when I heard her calling out my name in Cantonese. A crowd that had quickly formed around her near the entrance to the gallery obscured her. She must have seemed like a novelty to this crowd, which was unaccustomed to encountering such a woman in this context. I could not believe that my grandmother, who spoke not a word of English, had managed to navigate herself from Chinatown to the East Village. I later learned that she had done so by showing the invitation card to strangers who simply pointed in the direction that she should go. As I stood in the gallery in a state of disbelief, the crowd suddenly parted and my grandmother walked over to me. "What's all this? Who are all these people?" she asked in Cantonese. These are two very good questions. I was speechless for a moment and then quickly responded in Cantonese. I felt a tremendous tenderness towards my grandmother, but I also felt utterly unmasked. I was unprepared for such a dramatic collision of worlds whereby an integral part of my identity, as exemplified by my grandmother, was put on view. To be revisited by my dead grandmother so soon after my arrival to the East Coast to live was haunting, but it was also like a circle that has taken almost 3 decades to close. After I left DIA following the end of Wilson's discussion, I immediately went to 275 7th Avenue to offer my grandmother a Buddhist blessing. Thank you.